Hi everyone, welcome to the Write Your First Trigger with Apex Best Practices session. We have our speaker with us today, Muhammad Ali Qureshi. Um, Hi Imran, can you hear me?
Hi. Yeah, I can. Can you?
Yeah, I can hear you. Thank you for joining us today for this session, Imran. Um, the stage is all yours. You can share your screen and start the session.
Okay, sure. Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Muhammad Imran Qureshi, and today I'm going to conduct a session on Apex best practices and writing your first trigger. Um, First, I would like to introduce myself. I have 7 years of experience as a software developer. Out of 7 years, I have 5 years of experience as a .NET developer, and from last 2 or more than 2 years, I'm working as a Salesforce developer at Tectonic as a senior technical consultant. Um, on Salesforce, I mainly worked on Sales Cloud and Service Cloud. I also did many implementation on these clouds, as well as writing lots of triggers, codes. So today I'm going to share a bit about my experience on Trigger and Apex best practices. Okay, let's start. Okay, today's session consists of following topics. First, we discuss about what is trigger, then trigger events, context variables, and availability of context variables like new map, old map variables, then governor limits, and then Apex best practices. Um, Maybe I also do some show some uh, hands-on work on my DevOps and write some code. And you can also see how to write trigger and a handler class for the trigger. Okay, let's start with what is trigger. Basically, trigger is an Apex script that allows you to manipulate your data before or after DML operations. Let's suppose you want to update company name on lead. Whenever a lead is created, you want to update the company name with Park Dreaming, let's suppose, or Salesforce, or with any other name. So you can do this by using a trigger. And let me give you one more example. Let's suppose you want to you have a custom field on contact object, like um, email is missing. Okay, whenever the contact record is created, if the email is not populated, the checkbox will be marked as a checked. So you can also write a trigger for this purpose. Okay, so here is a trigger syntax. For a trigger syntax, we have a trigger keyword with the name of the trigger and on which object you are going to write the trigger. In this example, I write the trigger on account object. Then the events. My trigger will fire on before insert and before update. So this is the syntax for the trigger, how to write a trigger. Okay, I am also going to write a trigger as well. Okay, so if you want to write a trigger, first you should have a DevOps at least, and then open a developer console, and then click on the file, new Apex trigger. The name of the Apex trigger is, let's suppose I'm going to write it on lead object. So lead trigger, and the S object will be lead. Not working. So we are focusing on the slides.
Sure. I can
Okay.
see your screen.
Okay. Um, so this is the trigger syntax. Okay, we are moving towards trigger events. We have multiple events on the trigger, mainly insert. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay. So now I'm talking about context variables. Context variables are very important in the triggers, and mainly we have multiple context variable like is executing, is insert, is update, is delete. Is insert is will be used when we are going to insert a record and we want to run our logic only when the record is inserted. Is update is used when we want to fire our code when the record is update. So is delete for the same purpose when the record is deleted. So is before and is after. Okay, let's suppose we have a trigger, and on that trigger we have both type of events. Let's suppose before insert and as well as after insert, and we want to do some automations on before insert and some automations on after insert. In that case we are not going to write multiple trigger, as this is not the best practice. We can only write the recommended practices. We can only write one trigger per object. So in this scenario we will add a condition by using is before and is insert. So that code will be run only when the record is inserted and in the before context. And if we want to run our code in the after context of the insertion event, so we will write our code inside the is after and is insert condition. Same for is undeleted. Okay. New map, old map, these four context variables are very important. We use these variable uh, in every code, in every condition, in every scenario. Normally new basically return a list of new version of the subject records. New map actually returns a new map of IDs to the new version of the subject. Okay. In new case we just have a list of new version of the subject records,
Sorry to
and in
interrupt
new
you,
map.
Imran.
Yeah.
We have
Yes.
lost. Sorry to interrupt you. We have lost you. Yeah,
uh,
I can no longer see your screen.
okay. Mm,
Can you try ending the screen share and sharing it again?
okay.
Thank you.
Mm. Now can you see my screen?
Yeah, I can see it. Thank you, Imran.
Okay. Okay. I'm talking about new map. Okay. And new map actually a map. Basically, it's a key value pair, and in new map we have IDs, and against the ID we have the subject record. The old version of the subject records, and same for the old map. Old map actually consists key value pair. Key is the ID of the record, and then the other field of the record will be in the value. Now I am going. Now I'm talking about the availability of trigger.new, old, new map, and old map context variables in the trigger events. In before insert, we have only trigger.new context variable. Because before insert, we don't have any old version of the record because it is going to be inserted first time. and we don't have old map as well, and we don't have new map as well, because it is the first time the record is going to be inserted, as well as it's in the before context. So the IDs is will not be generated in this context. So that's why we don't have new map, because for the new map or old map we should have the ID of the record. So for the after insert, we have trigger.new and trigger.new map as well. Um, for old and old map, we have the same reason. The record is going to be inserted very first time. But in this case, we have trigger.new map context variable as well. The reason behind this, in after insert context, we have the ID of the record, so that's why we have the new map context variable in the after insert. Before update and after, in before update and in after update, we have all four context variables: new, old, new map, old map. And in new and new map, we have the new version of the subject record, and in old and old map, we have the old version of the subject record. In before delete, we just have the old and old map context variable. We don't have any new and new map context variable, because the record will be deleted. So we just have the old values for this event. Same for the after delete, we just have old and old map. We don't have new and new map context variable, and the reason will be the same, just like before delete. For after delete, we just have a trigger.new and trigger.new map context variable. We don't have old and old map context variable, because in undelete it is just like an insertion operation. Actually, it's a restore. The record will be a restore in undelete event with the same ID actually. So these are the availability of trigger.new, old, and new map and old map variables. Okay, let me check one more time. Is my DevOps is working now? No. Okay. Okay, governor limits. Okay, that's all from the trigger side. Unfortunately, my DevOps is not working, so that's why I can't do any coding or development on the triggers. So let's move on the governor limits. Why I am covering this topic? Because after this we are going to cover Apex best practices, and for Apex best practices we should have some knowledge about the governor limits, per transaction Apex limits. Okay, as we all know, Salesforce actually is a multi-tenant environment. That means Apex runs on in multi-tenant environment. Um, Multi-tenant means, let's suppose we have a single server, and this the resources of that server is shared with multiple orgs. So each org have a same amount of resources. No org can have a big amount of resources as compared to the other org. So that's why we have a governor limits. So per transaction Apex limit means whenever we perform any operation like insert, update, delete, undelete. So it's just so the complete cycle call a single transaction. Okay, so for a single transaction we can only uh, use 100 sockle queries in sync operation, and for async operation we can only use 200 socket queries. And total number of records retrieved is will be 50,000. Total number of DML statements will be 150. Total number of records processed by DML will be 10,000. Total heap size will be 6 MB for the sync and 12 MB for the async. And maximum CPU time on the Salesforce server is 10 seconds for the sync and 60 seconds for the async. So these are actually some of the governor limits. And now I am going towards Apex best practices. Okay, the first and the very important best practice in Apex is bulkify your code. What do you what is mean by bulkification of your code? It means we have to work on large set of data rather than on a single record. Let's see the example. In this trigger, we just pick the first record from the trigger.new list, and we work on this uh, only this account, only this record. Okay, and let's suppose there is a insertion or updation on multiple records. So in this case, the updation or insertion will perform only the very first record, and all the remaining records will remain same, and the data manipulation or any sort of updation or a manipulation won't affect on these records because we hard coded the index number. So that's why only the first record will be used for the data manipulation or updation. So this is a very this is a poor code. We should do a bulkification. So in this example, I do a bulkification. So you can see rather than I picked a first record, I use a list completely, and I performed a looping on this list, and inside the loop I did a data manipulation. I update the description with name, colon, billing state. Okay, so this is a good example of bulkification, and it is a very important best practice or very important concept. And it okay, after this we have another very important best practice. We cannot use any query or DML inside for loops. As I mentioned in the governor limit slide, we have only 100 socket query limit and 150 DML. We can only perform 150 DML. So in this case, if I use any socket query inside the for loop or DML operation inside the for loop, and let's suppose the records are more than 100 or 150, so in this case we will hit the governor limit. So that's why we cannot use socket queries or DML inside the for loop. So this is the example showing both query and DML statement inside a for loop. You can see here is the for loop, and I use a list, sorry, a socket query inside a for loop as well as a DML operation also inside the for loop. So it can hit a governor limit, so it will generate an error. So the optimized way of writing a code is here. I use in this example I used socket query outside the for loop as well as a DML operation outside the for loop. So we should use any socket query or DML outside the for loop. We cannot, we should not use both these things inside the for loop. Okay. Now I'm moving on another best practice. Okay. It is recommended use socket query for loop. Okay. If we use in unoptimized code example, I use a SOCL query and uh, initialize the list of account with this SOCL query. And in optimized code, I use SOCL query inside the for loop, not inside the for loop, but actually with the for loop. So in unoptimized code example, it can be hit heap limit size. That means in this case we can hit a governor limit, and as I mentioned earlier, we should write our code in this manner that we should not hit any governor limit. So we should write our code in optimized way. I just initialize, declare a list of accounts. After that, I use a SOCL query with the for loop, and I add all the account inside the list. And after that, I perform a DML operation. So in this manner, the heap limit, governor limit, won't be hit or won't be reached. After this, we should use apex limit methods. Um, let's see this example. Um, Here I am querying all the opportunities um, that have these account IDs. And after this, I just add up all the opportunity size with the get DML rows. And if the sum of these two sizes greater than the um, limit DML rows, I just um, add an error. And if the size is less than the get limit DML rows function, so I just perform my um, updation or insertion. In this case, I just add an error. Okay. Let me check one more time. Okay. Use collection, streamlining queries, and efficient for loops. Okay. In this example, I curate opportunity object two times. We have different filters, um, but I used two different list of opportunities, and also used two different SOCL queries. So this is not the optimized way. Okay, we can query all the opportunities against this filter and populate all these opportunity in a single list rather than use a two list. And inside the for loop we can use the condition. Okay. uh, in this example, as I used a single query to fetch all the stage that are closed lost or closed won, and I just filter out all these opportunities inside the for loop by using if and else if conditions. So this is the efficient way. We have to use minimum number of SOCL. We have to use minimum number of DML operations, because if we use many SOCL or many DML operations, it can hit a governor limit. Okay, we cannot use hard code IDs inside the Apex code. The reason behind this, let's suppose I'm working on sandbox and I create a record type on account, and I used the record type ID inside the for loop. Okay, and I am going to deploy that Apex code on another org. maybe on another sandbox or maybe on the production. So it can um, generate an error when you are going to execute the code, because there will be a difference between the IDs. So we should not use the hard code IDs inside the Apex code. And the reason behind this, if we are going to deploy our code on multiple awks, it can generate an error, or it can crash our code. Hmm. Okay. In this example, I used hard code IDs inside the for loop, and in this example, I use um, um, record type developer name or name rather than a record type ID, hardcode record type ID. So the name remains same in all the ops, or developer remains same in all the ops, but IDs can be changed. Okay, that's it. Um, I think it's uh, a short one. I'm expecting.
Thank you, Imran, for a great session. I'm sure it will be helpful for anybody who is thinking about writing their first trigger, and also who for anybody who is already writing and they can make use of the best practices that you have shared. Um, if anybody has any questions, please leave them in the Q&A section on the right side of your screen, or you can also ask the question in the chat section as well. We will wait for a couple of minutes before ending the session.
Sure.
Thank you for persisting with the presentation, Imran, although there were a lot of dis- disruptions in between.
Uh,
Okay.